Hi everyone, my name is Donna Haj and I work for the UK Israel Tech Hub. I will be moderating today's session on the Israeli ecosystem. For those who don't know us, the UK Israel Tech Hub is a UK government team based between Whitehall and the British Embassy in Tel Aviv. Our goal is to build tech partnerships between the UK and Israel. We operate like a startup in a government, and we help UK corporates discover and tap into the best innovation coming out of Israel. We also help position the UK as a partner of choice for Israeli entrepreneurs. Since our establishment in 2011, we were able to facilitate 175 partnerships between a UK company and an Israeli one, with a commercial value of £85 million and a potential economic value of £800 million to the UK and Israel. We're very proud to say that the UK government has recognized our model as a success, and it will be replicating our model globally to other ecosystems, starting in Brazil and South Africa. I feel very lucky today to have this wonderful panel with me that will help me share the story about Israel. So let's start by a round of introductions.
Hi, Ronnie Cohen from Aria Capital.
Eliyav Alaluf, Follow the Seed, $50 million international investment group working out of Tel Aviv, Sydney, Australia, Beijing, China, and Silicon Valley.
Amir Eldad, previously a serial entrepreneur, now at the ecosystem level. I am an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder based in Israel, but hovering between Boston, Europe, Israel, and Australia as well.
Thank you. So I don't know if you've been to Tel Aviv lately or in Israel in general, but Israel is a very, very small country with a population of 8 million people. I believe the size of London. But Israel has earned its status as a startup nation mainly because it has one of the highest ratios of startups per capita. Imagine for every 1,400 people living in Israel, we have one startup, and that's a lot of startups. Multinationals like Facebook, Google, Amazon, Intel have all chose Israel as their second home, and there have been years operating their R&D centers and working on their most cutting-edge and precious technologies. Israel also continues to generate high-profile exits, like Amazon, like Waze that was acquired by Google for £1 billion. And Mobileye that was acquired for £15 billion by Intel, breaking every record in its industry. So obviously there's a story here to tell. Now, gentlemen, how can a country of 8 million people, as small as Israel, become one of the most powerful ecosystems in the world with 7,000 startups active and operating in its environment?
I think the beginning of this story is Israel history. Some people used to joke about it, that in Israel is not a country with a military, it's actually a military with a country. That's because the government spends a lot of money on military, and because of our proximity to our enemies, there's a lot of money that goes into technical investments. Those people are trained at a very early stage and they're given a lot of responsibility. For example, if you take the unit like 8200, very famous intelligent unit, 18-year-old kid enlists, and after 2 years of training, he starts to manage a $50 million project. Now, where in the world would you give a 20-year-old kid the responsibility to manage $50 million? Now, with that kind of experience, then they go on to the civilian markets, and essentially they replicate the skills. Now, in every great ecosystem in the world that you see, Silicon Valley and Tel Aviv, it's about government spending. The government trains the people go out and create great companies.
I would like to add to that I think, I mean, people when think about Israel, they start thinking maybe there is a fantastic government planning and so forth. I think really the main factor is really the mindset of the Israeli entrepreneur. Yes, I think I'm stereotyping, but the Israeli entrepreneur is typically very opinionated. They think that they know the best, and typically the others don't really understand it. But also, and also partly because of the army service, the Israeli community is a highly connected, tightly held community. And we always talk about 6 degrees of separation. Israel is a one-hope country. You want to reach someone, there is always someone that know the other, and again, the military service, the mandatory military service, is a part of it, and that's another very important factor.
If I can add about the one thing I always found about Israel is this multidisciplinary view that the soldiers, when they leave the military, in the military you sort of have every single aspect of technology and skills, and when entrepreneurs leave the military and they find a leader, one strong leader who would like to lead a team, there's always these multidisciplinary, they can build a team pretty quickly. And I feel that in many other countries where I've worked, in the US and Europe, you find that there's sort of fields of expertise where you would find more in Israel. And I think, apart from leaving the military aside, I think there's this multidisciplinary view that in Israel you can find teams who are good in this and good in that, and so there's a lot to do with that.
I do agree that at the end of the day, it all goes back to people, and I do think that Israeli entrepreneurs are the building blocks of their ecosystem. And I think people would want to hear more in terms of your experience with working with Israeli entrepreneurs and others, in terms of how are they different in terms of their thinking, mentality, or let's say even approach.
I can tell you that many years ago I had a discussion with an American professor, and he wanted to know what's so different about the Israeli mentality. There were a few other Israelis next to me, and I told him that one of the basic principles of the Israeli culture is mutual disrespect. So the guy next to me said, "Professor, don't listen to him, he's an idiot." So the professor turns to me and says, "I think you just proved your point." So it's very true that it's just like you said. Maybe I was more blunt, but it's the Israeli entrepreneurs. They always believe they have the better solution. It's very good when you're a startup company. It's not so good when you're trying to scale up, and you have 10 people in the room and 11 opinions. And this is something that you see, for example, we're working with American entrepreneurs, with Chinese, and with Australians in our fund, and we see much more disciplined. You have 2-3 guys that are innovating, have their, and once they make up their mind and set a direction, the other people follow. In Israel, they always argue.
I think that there is another aspect of, again, the characteristics of the Israeli entrepreneur is maybe a mode of survival. Within Israel, it's an isolated country. You cannot go and sell and to expand into nearby territories. You have to always go very far. Another element of survival comes from the army. Again, for example, is that you start being active only after the 3 years or more of active service and so forth. So there is an essence of survival. So you combine survival mode with being opinionated and trying to have control over your destiny. That's a kind of very strong ingredients of a good or at least a promising entrepreneur.
So we work, our capital works in the UK with Israeli technology companies, taking them to Europe and to China. And one of the things that we see is that the Israeli entrepreneur has really has one sentence, basically that failure is not an option. And I think that mindset really drives the entrepreneurs. Although, as quite rightly you said, that really when you're scaling up and you're raising money on the international scene, not always that's the best approach. However, working with companies and groups such as yourselves and VCs that are working in Europe and in Israel, I think that sort of bridges that gap. But I think also Israeli entrepreneurs are maturing. There's a lot more professional CEOs now with big companies generating sort of good CEOs that have done several startups now. And I think that sort of mindset, that startup mindset is sort of moved up a notch from the last 20 years or so.
So Israeli startups generated an amount, secured an amount of $5 billion in 2017. For a country as small as Israel, this is a massive amount. Now, from your experience working with the Israeli ecosystem, was this amount mainly secured by the 200 VCs and private investors that are based in Israel, or was it done by international investors?
So it depends. I think in Israel, at this stage, there is a very, very developed VC. By the way, taking a historical perspective, there is a very famous program called Yozma, which was actually started by the government I think maybe 30 years ago. And it was one of the unique examples of a government program that was extremely successful, and it really started the VC industry in Israel by creating 10 VC funds that some of them are actually still with us today. But then it really developed in more like an ecosystem way. And again, when we talk about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's the entrepreneurs, investors, large corporations, government, and universities. And then in each specific wave being, for example, Israel was trying to develop a fighter pilot and then terminated the project. It was the Lavi project. Then not tens of thousands, but quite a few engineers were going out into the open, and that actually helped create a large number of startup activities. The same for the Russian immigration wave and so forth. So those events, because of the tightness and the connectivity of the Israeli ecosystem, brought another level of interest to the VC funds. So basically, one step, brought the other. Today, the VC industry in Israel is extremely developed. Many local VCs, quite a few of all the blue chip international VCs are having a very active office in Israel. But I would say that most of the money, most of the limited partner money is foreign. Some people say that it should be fixed. Some people say that it's actually okay and can stay like this, but most of the money coming into the industry is money outside of Israel, mostly from the US, but also from elsewhere.
Okay. There has been a lot of discussions in the past couple of years about the transition that the Israeli high-tech industry is doing from moving from a startup nation to a scale-up nation, where startup nation focuses on building innovative startups that could be acquired quickly. Scale-up nation focuses on building mature, big multinationals with headquarters in Israel and a true global presence with hundreds of employees and substantial revenues. Why is it important to do that transition? Why fix something that is working so well?
I think that the American case is fantastic. That you see that they created an ecosystem that is based on taking risks and not being afraid to lose, and hence they become the world's biggest acquirers. People say that Silicon Valley is losing its touch because only 30% of the exits happen in Silicon Valley, but actually 75% of the value is generated in Silicon Valley still. So most of the exits that happen elsewhere are small. Sometimes companies are being bought for $100 or $150 or $200 million in cash, and they think they've made a fantastic deal. only to find out that the acquirer sells the same company after 5 to 8 years for $3, $4, $5 billion. So if you want to create a sustainable ecosystem, at least part of it should be large companies that have commitments to your home country. Israel right now has about 15 private companies that are valued at $1 billion or more, and it has quite a few international companies, public companies, and they work together with 300 R&D centers of multinationals that are external.
But what do we need to create in the ecosystem in order to create the right environment for these scale-up to cultivate and grow?
Necessarily something that needs to be done. I think it's a natural evolution of the Israeli ecosystem. At this stage, again, there are 7,000 startups. The job of creating a company and taking it to a few $1 million, I think that's already, people know how to do it. Scale-up needs more planning, more maybe something which is not necessarily within the DNA of the Israeli startups, but every startup that wants to dominate their market segment, they need to scale up. There is no other option. Part of it actually could be helped by the large density of multinational corporations. So if you're, for example, in the automotive industry and you want to meet all your large customers, you can do it in Israel in one day, where otherwise you need to travel the world for 2 or 3 weeks, which was demonstrated, for example, in the EcoMotion show that was 3 weeks ago. You could see the whole automotive industry from all over the world in Israel.
By the way, ignoring the buzzer is also Israeli mentality.
Yeah, Yossi Vardi, the godfather of entrepreneurship in Israel, said the Israelis don't accept authority. So this is a great example. So anything that you want to add?
I just want to say that it's a general evolution, because when Intel has 8 or 10,000 employees in Israel, and Google has big centers, and Oracle has big centers, it's an evolution that this is happening anyway. I think we can't stop it. In my opinion, the scale-up is already occurring, and Israel is not the startup companies that we saw 20 years ago. When I started, the dot-com days, it was very small. There's lots of that. Today, it is scale-up. It's in a way, it's already happened. It's just sort of an evolution, and I think that big companies like that create service companies around them which are going to service them.
I do think that it's an evolution, but I do think also in order to boost this evolution, we need to be very honest with ourselves as a society and acknowledge what we can and what we can't do, and think about ways that we can attract or create the talent needed for that second cycle. There are ways to attract talent from outside, like setting up all kind of visa schemes that allow talent from outside to come to the country, like the technician visa that has been going on for 2 years now in the UK, or the startup visa that was launched by Minister Matt Hancock. I also think there's a need to look at communities that we often overlook or underserved, and think how we can empower them and engage them in the digital economy in order to move to the next step of becoming a true sustainable ecosystem. And that takes me very nicely to my second question, my last question, which is, we can't talk about Israel without talking about trends. So we've seen AI, we've seen cybersecurity, we've seen automotive, we've seen drones and robotic. What are we expecting from Israel next?
I think what we've seen a lot, as you say, cybersecurity is big, but I think we see a lot of sports, sport tech, which is something that's really taken off in Israel. I saw that the latest reports with about 180 startups dealing with hydration, with sports sensors on shoes, but a lot of this kind of stuff comes in embedded form for other multinationals to embed in their technology. So I think we're going to see a lot of sports. I guess that's it. Maybe.
Last question,
My favorite thing is algorithmic companies. It's not sector bound. It means that any solution that can take information automatically from users to create a better solutions for those users. So that's an example would be like, Google or Waze are such solutions, Netflix. So it's.
I would like to say just one word about AI that we heard kind of all around. And I think, there are many trends and many buzzwords and many directions, but AI, I would actually rather talk about it more from the algorithmic perspective and really machine learning. It's not a trend, it's really a paradigm shift. And it touches practically every domain, and it will stay with us for the very long run.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. This was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.